Welcome to Strategically Speaking, a Deeper Dive. This is where we take a deeper dive into important issues of the day. And today we're going to talk about the Bretton Woods Conference. Now, in recent months, since Trump's inauguration, there's been a lot of talk about the old global trade system that's been in place since the end of World War II. And as a result, there have been quite a few references to the Bretton Woods Conference. I think it makes sense to stop for a moment and take a deeper dive into why Bretton Woods had such a significant and lasting impact on global trade. So, a little bit of background about the Bretton Woods Conference. It was held at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire from July 1st to July 22nd of 1944. There were 44 allied nations, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union that were present. It was organized mainly by the United States, and the United States leading representative was economist Harry Dexter White. From the United Kingdom, the leading economist of the day was John Maynard Keynes. The two of them, along with representatives from other nations, came together for the purpose of creating a new global economic order out of the chaos of World War II and World War I and the Great Depression. So why was this needed? Well, the old global economic order had failed in a spectacular fashion after, again, two world wars and a Great Depression that affected the entire international community. Something new was needed. To oversimplify, the old global economic order prior to Bretton Woods was predicated on a colonial system where each of the colonial powers traded within their colonial system and engaged in very limited exchange between systems. Each colonial system competed aggressively for resources and markets, which contributed to tensions between those colonial systems. Now, compounding the problem was rapidly evolving technologies and communication systems, which were making the traditional political relationships difficult to maintain as the new digital technologies of today are doing. Think about the impact that the internet and artificial intelligence and robotics and cell phones and all of that kind of stuff are having on political and economic systems today. Well, the radio and telephones and air travel and similar technologies back in the 30s and the 40s had the same impact. So after the destruction of the industrial base of the combatants in World War II, all parties realized that something better needed to be built. So they came together and they had several main goals on their agenda. Under political system goals, they wanted to first promote global stability, to prevent another depression or war that was fueled by economic circumstances. They wanted to support liberal democracies, favoring free market capitalism and representative governance over fascism and communism. Of course, that and the fact they wanted to contain communism, laying the groundwork for the United States leading the Western dominance over during the Cold War era, caused the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, the Soviet Union, to not participate in the world order that was Bretton Woods built. They also wanted to rebuild Europe and Japan to avoid the post-World War I mistakes that led to the rise of extremist regimes. In terms of trade, there were some goals as well. First was open markets. They wanted to encourage free and open international trade instead of protectionism that worsened the Great Depression. They also wanted currency stability. They wanted to create a system of exchange rates to facilitate international trade and investment. And then finally, they wanted to reduce trade barriers. Tariffs and quotas were discouraged to encourage greater global trade relationships and exchange. There were a number of major outcomes of the Bretton Woods Conference. The first is the International Monetary Fund. The purpose of the International Monetary Fund was to maintain cooperation and stability, to assist countries with balance of payment crises, and to play a role as the emergency lender and the overseer of international exchange rates. Then you have the World Bank, initially called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The purpose of this bank was to provide loans for the reconstruction of war-torn Europe and later for development projects on a global basis. Its role was to provide long-term capital investment in major infrastructure and economic development projects. Then you had fixed exchange rates. Each country agreed to peg its currency to the US dollar, and that the dollar itself was going to be convertible into gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. The US dollar therefore became the world's reserve currency. And then there was a movement towards trade liberalization. This led later to the creation of the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trades in 1947, which eventually led to the development of the World Trade Organization in 1995. Now, stepping back a little bit and looking at the goals from a philosophical perspective, there were several key motivations involved. First was the belief that economic interdependence would be an essential component of a peaceful, stable international relationship. The second is that U.S. leadership would be accepted as necessary for global stability, Pax Americana. The United States was the only nation that had the ability to project power globally at that point in time and to patrol the oceans of the world to make sure that pirates and rogue nations didn't interfere with free trade. And then there's multilateralism, which is the idea that you want to avoid dominance of one nation over others through cooperation as a result of international institutions that are being set up. There were tensions and compromises that came as a result of these policies being implemented. Keynes himself proposed a much larger role for an international clearing union with a supranational currency. He called it Bancor. It was rejected in favor of a dollar-based system. Developing countries also had limited say in and would struggle for decades within this structure, which favored the industrialized nations. And then finally, the Soviet Union attended initially, but refused to ratify the agreements, which contributed to East-West economic conflict and a divide that resulted in the Cold War. So in short, Bretton Woods created a U.S.-anchored capitalistic order that was designed to stabilize the global economy, to encourage free trade, and to strengthen democratic governments and lay the foundation for Western dominance and economic growth for the next 75 years. Now, during the next 75 years, there were a number of key events that I will dive into later. The first that bears mention is the decoupling of the U.S. dollar from gold. In other words, going off the gold standard to a free-floating currency during the Nixon administration. Another is the World Trade Organization, which took the concepts of the Bretton Woods Conference to the next level. And about that point in time, shortly after the World Trade Organization was created, China was given membership in the World Trade Organization and was treated as a developing country. And then, of course, if you look over time at the global trading relationships, you'll see that there became a very significant imbalance in trade, with the United States being the consumer nation out of all other nations, and most of the other nations, especially China, becoming manufacturing nations, which was the fundamental problem that Trump was trying to address when he began to talk about and impose tariffs early this year. I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to diving deeper into a few more of these topics. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would love to hear your comments. Of course, please leave a like, leave a comment if you have one, suggest a topic if you'd like, and please subscribe. All of these things help the algorithm expose this content to ever more watchers. Thank you for watching.